It always helps if I plug the microphone in. How you doing, folks? Sound check. Okay, now you should be able to hear me. So I was just saying that Bobo here, my daughter's little dog, she's off at college, so he's hanging out with us down here in Panama, and he's a good boy. Good rat-killing dog. He loves going after the rats that like to frequent the monkey cage. So I wanted to talk about where are you coming in from? This is, Bobo. His name is Bobo. Ashland, Kentucky. Lithuania? Wow. Yeah, he's a cute little dog. Indiana, Texas. Wow, that's great. All right, well, so I wanted to talk about South Africa. I did a live on CBN's YouTube today, and we had kind of a discussion about the South African government taking the Israeli government to court over what it claims are human rights abuses and accusing the Israelis of quote-unquote genocide as it relates to the war in Gaza. Now, never mind that nothing that they're doing in any way, shape, or form qualifies as the intentional destruction of an entire people group. There are, even if they killed everybody in Gaza, there are still millions of Palestinians that live elsewhere inside Israel, and they're not bombing those people. But nevertheless, the South Africans are going to bat for Hamas because Hamas can't bring the charges themselves to the International Criminal Court because they're not a state actor, they're not a state entity. Now, the United States and Israel, among other countries like Yemen, don't actually recognize the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. So all of this is kind of a exercise in stupidity. It's kind of like navel gazing. It doesn't really do anything for anybody. But I wanted to talk a little bit about it because of the nuclear level of hypocrisy that the South African government is engaging in by bringing this to the International Criminal Court. Not only that, but the South African government is actually trying to get itself elected as the chair, the presidency of the UN Commission on Human Rights, that would be like putting the Taliban in there, or Kim Jong-un or something. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's absolutely crazy. When you go and look at the long record of human rights abuses that have taken place from the current government in South Africa, when I say current government, I don't mean just Cyril Ramaphosa, the president now, but President Jacob Zuma before that, who was actually jailed 2 years ago for contempt of court. He was put in jail for that. But there were so many human rights abuses under that guy that it's just mind-boggling. The Human Rights Watch and even the U.S. State Department have reported that in South African jails, for example, there are hundreds of rapes every year of male inmates, hundreds of torture cases that are, reported, to say nothing of the cases that go unreported. South Africa is one of the most violent countries on planet Earth. And there is a systemic and systematic attempt by the current government to kill or drive out all of the whites in their country. As a matter of fact, I was just reading an article about how the government is trying to force airlines that operate in South Africa to adhere to a program they call the BBBEE or something like that. And it's basically like it's a program that requires them to have a certain number of black people owning the company before they can actually do business as an airline in South Africa. What the color of the person who owns the company has to do with anything beats me, but they are systematically driving people out of their jobs if they're white. They are systematically murdering and encouraging the murder of whites throughout the country, and especially in the white landowners. Okay. Now, to be fair, their argument is that after apartheid, whites owned like 60 or 70% of the land, and they only represented 10% of the country. And so you might look at that and go, oh, well, okay, I get it. This is about land redistribution. They want to redistribute the land more fairly. Well, then if you go and you look at the typical occupations of the people who own the land, the reason that whites tended to own more of the land is because they tended to be more, to work more as farmers. Farmers need land to farm. And this was not typically land that they had gone in and, murdered the owners who were black people and then, kicked those people off and established those things. No, this is land that had gone back 13, 14 generations, hundreds of years in that same family. I talked to many white farmers when I was there who say, our family has been here for 300 years on this farm. And so if there's a way to redistribute the land, I would submit to you it doesn't have to be by murdering the people who own the land. There are market-based, market-driven ways to do that. Now, this gets into some, difficult territory. Obviously, apartheid was a terrible thing in South Africa. And I think it escapes notice very often that the men who reversed apartheid were white. The very men who voted to get rid of apartheid were the white men who benefited from apartheid. They don't get credit for that. Now, when you go to South Africa, you will see that if you go into black neighborhoods, they are dramatically more violent than white neighborhoods. Whites don't typically go around in South Africa murdering their neighbors or stealing from their neighbors or looting the mall or anything like that. But that is a part and parcel of black South African culture. It's a very, very violent culture. And for that reason, the actual number of whites that were killed in South Africa is a tiny, tiny fraction of the total number of murders in South Africa every year. Something like 21,000 murders a year in that country. And there are some tricks that the government pulls with the statistics. You ever read that book, How to Lie with Statistics? Well, the South African government is pretty good at lying with statistics. They have made it so toxic and so dangerous for white people to live in South Africa that they're leaving in droves. Anybody who can leave is getting out. And I know that because many of them come to Panama. There are South Africans in our little town, go to my church. I know quite a few of them, and all of them will say, we left because it was either leave or die. I hear from many of my viewers on a consistent basis that they are whites in South Africa and they're horrified by what they see there, by what's happening there, by what's become of their country. And they say, I can't leave. I don't have the money. It takes money to move to a different part of the world and start all over again. And I just don't have the money to do it. And so I'm stuck here. There are groups of Afrikaners, the white South Africans, that have banded together and formed political action committees like AfriForum. I went and talked to those guys and got a real education about the truth of the matter when it comes to how whites are treated in South Africa. So, for example, because of this policy that requires black ownership in to a certain percentage in South African companies, many whites are basically shut out of the job market. And there's very little that they can do. So unless they're independently wealthy, they're looking at old money, they visited on those who first implemented it. But as my mom used to say, two wrongs don't make a right. And if it was wrong to be prejudiced against blacks during the apartheid era, if it was wrong to segregate them and to force them into, poverty, then it's wrong for the South African government to be doing it now. And this is where it gets very difficult, okay? When you look at the two cultures side by side, Afrikaner culture is based on Christian values from their Dutch ancestors. I think they were essentially like Mennonites that moved to South Africa way back when. And so they value hard work, they value honesty, they value living up to your commitments, they value all those kinds of things that we would say lead to succeeding in life. On the other hand, black culture is not based on, in South Africa, not based on do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. It's based on do unto others before they do unto you. Take from others before they take from you. Kill others before they kill you. And I want you to hear me very clearly here. I want to say, I don't think this actually has to do with the color of their skin. I think it has to do with the fact that the black culture in South Africa embraced communism back in the 1990s, or even before. I really think that's what it has to do with. And the ANC in South Africa is a staunchly communist organization. There are other political parties which are even more to the left. And what these things do is they try to collectivize everything, make the person feel very small and insignificant, reduce everything to the lowest common denominator. And when you put people into a situation like that, what they tend to do is to heck with everybody else. I'm just going to steal from him before he steals from me. I'm going to get what I can get. And it doesn't matter what it does to my country, my culture. I mean, you You look at the riots that took place 2 years ago in South Africa after Jacob Zuma was put in prison or was arrested. And after, there were some other things that were kind of causes of those riots, but swept the country, and they were very violent. They burned down malls. They burned down, people's houses, people's businesses. They attacked white people wherever they found them. It looked like actually Detroit or Chicago. So what I want you to hear me saying is that we can't just say that South Africa's got these problems and we don't, and they ought to fix it. But because the United States is going that same direction. I made that case, back in like 2018, and I got crucified online for saying that the violence and division that we see in South Africa is coming to America. And I got crucified for saying that. I got called a racist. I got called, all kinds of stuff. And yet, that is exactly what we're seeing in America. That's what we saw in 2020, in the Black Lives Matter riots. America is more divided today than I think we've ever been. More violent today in many ways than we've ever been, at least politically. And we are quickly heading down this road. I think the Obama administration was really the beginning of that in the United States, because up until that point, you couldn't look across the street and see a guy and say, I bet that guy voted for the other side, the other team. But after the first Obama election, you could pretty much do that. I talked to a lot of black people who said, well, I don't agree with any of Obama's policies, but of course I had to vote for him because he's black. I've talked to a couple dozen black people who have told me that they literally voted for Barack Obama simply because he was one of them. He was black. And when you try to point out how absolutely racist and disgusting that is, they just kind of look at you and shrug. But he's one of us. I have to vote for him. So, you see the fluffy puppy back there? That's Muppet. Muppet is my wife's dog. Hi, Muppet. Hey, girl. That's a sweet girl, aren't you? Yeah. Oh, now she's going to come get some pettings. Oh. She doesn't like to get picked up. Poor Muppet. Yeah, she's a good girl. So, it is concerning, and it's really very sad. I have a son who is mixed race that we adopted, and to think that he has to face that kind of difficulty when he goes to certain places, and I have to face that kind of challenge when I go certain places. I remember I was reporting on the violence in Chicago one time, and I was there over Sunday. And so I didn't have anything to do Sunday morning, so I wanted to go to church. I hate to miss church if I can avoid it. So I just drove down the street in South Chicago and found a church that looked good and parked my car and walked in. And I walked in the door, and the first thing that I saw was a little boy, probably about 12 or 13 years old, and he looked up at me and he said, "Are you the police?" I've had that happen in a couple of barber shops, and I walk in, they'll say, "I don't know, I ain't never cut white people hair before." Do we really live in a country that is so divided and so, separated that there are literally black people out there that don't know a white person personally, and vice versa? It doesn't need to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Unfortunately, it is that way for the same reason in the United States as it is in South Africa, and that's because it is profitable for the politicians. Politicians can make political hay out of stoking the fires of division. And that's exactly what they do in South Africa. So if 90% of the people in South Africa are black, then the more the politicians cater to the black crowd, the more they are going to garner votes. And they're guaranteed they're going to go in, make it into office. Now, when it comes to these white farm murders, they try to point out that, well, this is such a tiny fraction of the total murders that there's no genocide against white people. But part of the problem with that is that they are not taking into account the number of white people who have left the country. They don't keep track of those numbers. And so many white people have left the country that the per capita murder rate for whites in South Africa is actually very, very high because there are so few white people left. And when I was there, I talked to a couple of white guys that were like, you know, I don't even stop at stoplights because you stop at a stoplight, somebody's going to run up and break your window and try to rob you, try to attack you. There are certain roads I just literally don't drive on. That doesn't sound like a functional way to live, does it? Now, you may be saying, and there were some people on the last live that said, oh, wait a minute, South Africa's a great country. I went to Cape Town. It was beautiful. We had a great time. Yeah, you and 7 million other tourists every year go to Cape Town and they have a wonderful time. But that's because you probably don't go visit the neighborhoods that I went to visit in Cape Town, which those neighborhoods make Cape Town one of the most dangerous cities on the planet. But if you were to take out the non-black neighborhoods, the good neighborhoods in Cape Town, where there is a tremendous amount of security, there are actually 4 times as many security guards, armed security guards, in Cape Town as there are policemen. And that's because it's so bad, crime is so bad, that if you want to be protected from criminals, you basically have to pay to have a private police force come and protect you and your family. People, even in the middle class, live in houses that look like fortresses on the outside. They've got very high gates. They've got high voltage electrical lines that run on top of their fences. They have dogs, they have cameras, they have lights, they have everything. And as many as possible try to get permits to carry a firearm and try to protect themselves because their home invasions are a big thing over there. If you go to my friend John Correa's YouTube channel, he runs a big channel called Active Self-Protection. And Tim Miller actually does a lot of the same thing. If you go to Tim Miller's podcast here on YouTube, my friend Tim Miller has been on here with me many times. Tim uses a lot of found footage of actual real life attacks and home invasions and carjackings and things like that. And a lot of his videos actually come from South Africa. South Africa and Brazil are the 2 most popular for those kinds of videos. And not just because it's super dangerous, there's a lot of criminal activity there, but because a lot of people have surveillance cameras there. Here's a question. Why doesn't Israel charge Hamas with crimes against humanity? Well, Hamas is a non-state actor, Denise, so they couldn't bring them up on crimes of against humanity in the Hague. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter. It's not going to matter. It's interesting, it's telling that these charges that were brought against Israel by South Africa have already gone to trial just a couple weeks after they announced them. Normally, it could take years for those things to work their way into the court. But it tells you how the court itself is biased because they agreed to take up this case immediately and put it on trial. And in the case of a genocide finding by the court, that could normally take years to come, for them to do an investigation and all that. I would venture to say that you'll see it in a matter of weeks or even months or even weeks. So the security level in South Africa among everyday people is off the charts. Super high. I mean, you drive around middle-class neighborhoods and you go, good grief. This place is crazy, the amount of security they've got here. But they have to. They have to have it. You never drive around with your windows open in South Africa. You'll get carjacked in a heartbeat. So why is it ironic on a nuclear level that the South African government would take Israel to task for human rights abuses? Well, because the South African government engages in human rights abuses all the time. And everybody knows it. Everybody says so. I saw, when I was in South Africa, one of the most horrific things I've ever seen in my entire life, in 20 years of doing this job. I saw one of the most horrific killings I've ever seen. There was a big, protest going on against in Johannesburg, against the migrants that are coming into South Africa from Zimbabwe and elsewhere. And the South Africans, black South Africans, were angry at these guys because they're taking jobs and taking social services and everything, all the same things we see in the United States. And there was this kid walking by that he just came walking around the corner, was, dressed like he was going to school, probably 20 years old or something, probably a college student. And he just goes walking by and somebody was like, hey, where are you from? And he said, oh, I'm from Zimbabwe or something. He was one of those migrants. And they were like, there's one of them right there. And they just ran up with, somebody had like a big gulp cup full of gasoline. And they just ran up and splashed the gasoline on this guy and set him on fire. And then he just rolled around on the ground and burned to death. It was one of the most horrific things I've ever seen in my life. And do you think anybody got charged for that murder? No, they didn't. The murder clearance rate is the rate at which murders are solved and somebody is charged for a murder. And it's actually very low in the United States for countries that purport to be civilized. It's in the mid 50s, about 57, 59% maybe. And that's very low. In South Africa, the murder clearance rate is about 12%. But the murder clearance rate in and among the black culture and the black neighborhoods is like 1%. That means that you could walk into, not a white guy, but if you're a black guy, you could walk into one of those neighborhoods and just randomly cap somebody in the head and walk off. And the chances of you going to jail are 1%. Just imagine that. Think about that. It's absolutely unbelievable. The murder clearance rate is so low in South Africa that, again, people have to take their self-protection on themselves. It's one of the reasons why more and more people in the United States are taking their protection on themselves. But the concept of living in a neighborhood where there are no fences between houses, and I'm not talking about a picket fence, I'm talking about 10-foot high fence with concertina wire and electrical wires on top to shock anybody who tries to come over, is unheard of in South Africa. Nobody in South Africa could even imagine living in a place like that. That's why if they see the United States, they just go like, they don't know what to think, because it's mind-boggling to them that you could live in a place where you don't have to have fences and dogs and lights and cameras and blah, blah, blah. Now, the United States is getting less and less that way. And, part of the reason that the United States is that way is because our fences are normally Glock 17s. They're normally in our house under our bed or something. If you live in a place where most people have a gun, then you probably don't need to worry about putting a big fence out in front of your house, because if everybody knows that everybody has a gun, they're not likely to come kick in your door because they will die. And I like living that way. Where we lived in West Virginia, I didn't even know how to lock my house. I didn't even know where the keys were. We never even locked the house. We'd go to church and come home, and all the doors had been left open the whole time we were at church. And that's the kind of place I want to live. I want to live someplace that's safe, that I don't have to worry about locking everything up all the time. All right, so let's get to some other questions here. See if there's any other questions. Have I seen video on the protest in Yemen? Yeah, I saw it. A big, massive demonstration in Sana'a, pro-Palestinian. Oh, the other thing about the government of South Africa is that just before they brought the charges of genocide against Israel, President Ramaphosa met with the leader of the Janjaweed militia from Sudan. The Janjaweed militia from Sudan is known for its human rights abuses. It's like a feature, not a bug. It's probably one of the worst terror groups on the planet. And he hosted them. And in a stunning display of irony, they went to the genocide memorial in South Africa together and laid a wreath at the feet of the statues there. Unbelievable. Can Israel counter-sue South Africa? Well, they're not really suing. One tired mama. I mean, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get a finding of genocide against Israel, which would give the world body, the UN and others, the ability to call for sanctions, arms embargoes, things like that against Israel. Now, the United States has already said, we're not going to abide by any of this. None of this has any jurisdiction. Israel has said the same thing. And if you want to know how effective the International Court of Justice is, all you have to do is look at the finding that they made against Russia in 2022, calling for Russia to end their war in Ukraine. And Russia went, yeah, right, that's not going to happen. So, yeah, these guys don't have, this is a massive self-licking ice cream cone. It just is ridiculous theater. Black economic empowerment. Yeah. Thank you, Ilse. Yeah, black BEE, black economic empowerment. If your policy is that, why don't they just call it economic empowerment? Why does it have to be black economic empowerment? The government's job is not to favor one group of people over another. The government's job is to provide a level playing field for all of its citizens. And you don't do that by forcing companies to employ people that just because of the color of their skin. That's not the way to do that, right? Okay. Let's see what other questions we got here. What about what's going on in Ecuador? I'm going to do a whole podcast on that maybe tomorrow. So we'll talk about that later. There's definitely some stuff going on in Ecuador. Did Olga get her fridge? Yes, she did. You guys were so generous to Olga and to the Pastora and to the little pregnant mama and all of the girls that are in jail right now, that there's still money coming in. We've got people who asked if they could give directly to the pastora on a monthly basis to help support her and her church. Now, again, I've been accused, like, oh, I can't believe you would support a female pastor. I'm not in favor of female pastors. Neither is the pastora. She started a church because there were no men stepping up to do it. And it was better to have a church run by a woman than not have a church at all. So let's just say that the pastora is just leading a Bible study for a bunch of women. Again, there are no men in her church. There are some little boys, but there are no men. There are no men coming. This is indicative of the greater problem. There's so much passivity and cowardice in men these days that they're not stepping up and fulfilling their roles, and so women are forced to do it, which is sad. But suffice it to say, you guys gave enough money to do everything we went down there to do and then some. So we actually had to look for other places to put some of that money to help people out that are in need. We went around and helped, like that woman who was possessed. That was weird. But we tried to do what we could to help her and to maybe get her off the street. And I don't know how successful we will be at that. I have to say, it is emotionally draining and exhausting to go on a trip like that. When I got home yesterday, I wanted to just sleep the whole day. I didn't feel very good anyway. I was kind of fighting something, but I think it's just mentally draining to go and just pour yourself into these people and to realize that you can't fix it with money. It would be so easy if we could just fix the problem with money, but it's not a money problem at the end of the day. It is a spiritual problem. And we can use money as an entree to help these people survive long enough so that we can help them with the spiritual problems, the spiritual aspects that they lack. But again, there's no men in any of those houses, any of them. All of those women that we're helping are single woman homes. Usually it's multiple moms and all their kids that are banding together just to try to survive. And it is such a hard issue, such a spiritual problem. And there's just, I don't want to have to be the male figurehead for 40 different women. I wasn't meant to do that. I'm the male figurehead for my household. But you run into all these women who just have nothing, and they have no man to protect them, to provide for them, to give them affection, to anything, to tell them that they're valuable. That's why I have to take Connie along, because you can imagine how those women throw themselves at me when Connie's not there. And that's, I can't do that. So if I'm going down there, I got to take Connie. And I have a hard and fast rule that I will not be alone with a woman who's not my wife. A different level and improve their station a little bit. And all I have to do it with is money. Money is so ineffective when it comes to that. But you guys were very generous and gave lots of money. So we did the best we could with it. And we're going to continue to support those women. We're going to continue to keep in touch with them and try to coach them because, like with Olga, I gave her the money to buy her refrigerators and to buy all the supplies she needed to get her business started. What's the first thing she bought? She went out and bought a television and sent me a picture of it. Look, I got a TV. And I had specifically told her, don't spend any of this money on stupid, frivolous stuff. This money is meant to help you get a business going so that you can support yourself. And what's the first thing she buys is a TV. Well, I didn't have a TV in my apartment. I'm like, our family, I'm a millionaire. We didn't have any TVs in our house for years. I wouldn't let my kids watch TV. So I had a very long, heartfelt talk with Olga about you have to spend your money on things that are income producers, not income reducers. And she saw the logic in that, and she went and sold the TV and used the money to buy the stuff that she needed to get her business going. And I think tomorrow is the first day that she's going to actually be out there selling things. But you can see how frustrating it is. We can't just expect that these women are going to, you shower them with money and they're going to know what to do with it. They've never had money before. They don't know how to plan and think from a successful person's point of view. That's one of the reasons why they are where they are. That's one of the things I told Olga. I said, you are not poor because you were born into a poor neighborhood. You're not poor because you don't have any money. You're poor because you have a bad mentality. You have a poor person's mentality. If you make your decisions based on improving your comfort, when you should be making decisions based on improving your family's situation, you're thinking like a poor person. And so what I have to do now is I have to go through and I have to, you have to go through and coach them on how to do business and hold their hand. And this is time consuming, especially when we have a bunch of girls we're doing this for. It's emotionally draining and very frustrating at times when you see them make a stupid, choice, make bad choices. The little mama that's about to give birth, she's 18 years old. Of course, there's no man in the picture. She just went out and got herself pregnant. And she was just begging me, and she's yesterday texting me, begging me to please send me some money. Please send me some money. I need money for my baby. And I'm like, no, you don't. We bought you diapers and baby clothes and stuff like that. And, well, I need money for formula. No, you don't. That's why God gave you boobs. You can breastfeed and your baby will be fine. But she desperately wants me to give her money. And I basically just told her flat out. I said, look, I'm not going to give you money because you're too irresponsible. And she's like, why would you say that? And I'm like, you have a tattoo. You're 18 years old. Did that tattoo cost money? Yes. So why would you stain your body, pay money for something that will not help you in any way? All it does is it marks you as a low-class person. I don't care. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong, ipso facto wrong with having a tattoo. I don't care if you have a tattoo or not. Personally, I don't have any, and I'm not going to get any because I'm perfectly happy with my body just the way God gave it to me. And to me, this is just my opinion, tattoos are a mark of insecurity and usually a mark of a social class that I don't want to be associated in. I don't want people to assume I'm a part of a low social class. Now that's different in the United States nowadays because wealthy people have tattoos too, but you can be wealthy and not be classy. And I want to be classy. Now this is just my opinion. I know I'm ruffling some feathers out there. Please don't get your undies in a wad. This is just my opinion on things. Let's say, I see a question going by. Who were those guys in Olga's house? Okay, so that wasn't Olga's house, actually. That was Olga's mother's house. And she lives there with several of her children. And the guys that were there were her children's, one of her daughter's man. They're not married. And then I think the other one was another one of her daughter's men. I say man in a very loose term because those guys are certainly not men in the traditional sense. They're males, but they're big grown-up babies. It was the middle of the daytime and that guy was laying on his bed playing video games. I feel about video games about the same way I feel about tattoos. The video games are electronic income reducers. They're passive activity. Passive activity is the bane of success. And if you want to be successful, you cannot engage in passive activity. This guy is living in a hovel, and he's perfectly fine with that. And so he just sits there and turns his mind to mush playing video games all day. So, yeah, he's a grown-up little boy is what he is. Yeah. I told her I told her, if you don't sell that TV, you're not getting any more money from me. Because I am not paying for things that are going to make your life worse. Yeah. When you're 80 years old, I've never met anybody who is glad for their tattoos when you're 80. I like asking people about their tattoos, because I figure if you're going to mark up your body like that, if you're going to stain yourself, then you probably want people to notice you because you've got some insecurity issues. And so I've asked people about it. And I very rarely have people say, "Oh, I'm so glad I got this tattoo. It means so much to me." There are some times when people do that. They say, "Oh, this is to remind me of my mom," or whatever. Okay, that's fine, whatever. People get their kids' names tattooed, whatever. I can remember all my kids' names. I don't need to write them on my body. But, if you want to do that, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. Go, it's your body. I don't care. I'm just not going to do it to me. But most of the time, I hear, "Well, I was drunk." Or I hear, "That's my ex-boyfriend made me get his name in the middle of my face," or something. It's just... I always told my kids, I don't care if you get a tattoo or not. I think it's a sign of insecurity. And if you want to act out of your weakness, do what you got to do. But if you get a tattoo that's visible when you're wearing a shirt, you can pretty much count on the fact that you're likely never going to pay federal taxes, because you'll never get a good enough job to have to do that. Why don't they get a tattoo of a mullet? What? You lost me there. We Jews are forbidden to tattoo or mark the body because it's worship of self. In the Bible, it was a sign of slavery. So I sometimes want to ask people like, "Oh, who are you a slave to?" And even the tattoos are not near as bad as the people who get these, look like they took a header into a tackle box and they got all these holes punched in their face. That doesn't look pretty. Man or a woman, that doesn't look nice. It makes you look like a freak. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm dating myself, but I've never, ever met anybody who was like, "Man, that guy's really handsome, but if only he had some holes in his face, he'd be a lot better." I'm sorry. Oh, it's just not my cup of tea. Speaking of cup of tea, I just spilled my drink on my keyboard. All right. We are about done. Let's see. Do I know John Lovell from WPS? No, I don't. Let's see if there's any other questions here real quick. I appreciate talk about, this is the ruffling feathers version of my podcast today, because I've covered women pastors, tattoos, and facial piercings, among other things. So if I haven't offended you yet, just wait around and I'll get to you. I am not in favor of women pastors, but if there are no men pastors, then they got to do what they got to do. And it would be a mistake to say, well, there are no men stepping up, so we're just not going to have a church. I think that sometimes women have to step up, and God's given them a special strength and dispensation to do that. Okay, so if you haven't hit the like button, would you please do that? Just hit the like real quick because that helps a lot. And if you haven't subscribed, I'd love it if you'd go do that. I've been putting a lot of the videos that I'm talking about up on locals. If you go to chuckholton.com, I'm going to put some of the videos that I made about South Africa up over there because if I put them on YouTube, they're too graphic and YouTube will ding me for that. So I'm going to put them over on locals, but prepare yourselves. They're not for the faint of heart. I have video of that guy that got burned up, but I'm not going to post that. That's the kind of thing you can't unsee, and I would not wish that on anybody. It's terrible. So thank you for watching. God bless you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much that you accept us just like we are, and you want us to live good lives. You want us to live successful lives, and you've set forth the rules of the game, so to speak, in your word. You've written us a very, very long letter that explains to us what you would have for us, the way you'd have us to live. And even when we fail at that, even when we make a mess of our lives, you have so much grace and so much mercy. And I pray that you would have that kind of grace on me and on Olga and on Wendy and on the Pastora, all the ladies that were helping in Cartagena. I pray that you would be with Israel and that you would protect Israel and that they would be able to finish this fight sooner rather than later. We know you are working out your plan in Israel and everywhere else, and we thank you for that. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, folks. Thanks for watching.